One of the very first things that we learn when it comes to conscious manifestation is that our aim and objective is to live in the end in imagination. That we want to occupy and embody the state of consciousness where what we desire is already so. But a question that I often get asked is, how exactly do we do this? How exactly do we get ourselves into a state? So today I thought it would be helpful if I share what I do to get into a state, how I use my imagination to create the experience of the wish fulfilled. And of course, noting some things that we do that create a lot of resistance and ultimately keep us from living in that end, from actually experiencing that desire and fulfillment and imagination. So if you have been struggling with getting into the state, if you aren't quite sure what this means or how to go about it, then you want to stick around because this video is for you. By the way, hi, I'm Missy Renee. On this channel, we talk all things manifestation and the law of assumption. So if that is a topic that you want to learn more about, then definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon for notifications, and if you enjoy these videos, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. If you're interested in more of my resources, such as my coaching programs, my courses, and masterclasses, I will have links to all of that down in the description box below, so don't forget to check that out. Now, if you have been studying the law for more than 5 minutes, you probably are already aware that the aim and objective here is to imagine ourselves already experiencing being the person that we want to be, or having the thing that we desire to have. Which sounds so incredibly simple in theory, and it is, but where a lot of the struggle comes in is the doubts, fears, and reasons why we cannot experience what we want. Usually it's the fears and circumstances of 3D that instill all of that fear and sense of doubt in us, which ultimately keeps us or prevents us from living in the end. And the biggest reason for this, the root of this fear and doubt, is that we are still looking at imagination as if it's just a fantasy. We are seeing and perceiving the 3D world as being the real world, but we are still looking at imagination or perceiving our imagination to be fairy tale land. So when we imagine and we close our eyes and go there and feel into it, the moment that we open our eyes and come back to 3D, everything is still the same. It feels like we're back in the real world. Basically, we are identifying far too much with the 3D circumstances. We perceive the physical reality to be the real one, and this is creating all sorts of inner conflict within us. This is the reason why people struggle so much to live in the end. If we keep identifying with the 3D physical world and continue to see imagination as fantasy, or the techniques like a means to an end to get something in the future, we're going to continue to perpetually construct states but never occupy them. Basically, we're going to keep building these worlds in imagination but never actually live there because to us, it doesn't feel real enough. We identify with the outer world way too much, and that is why we have so much confliction when applying these teachings. So the first thing that we must do when it comes to occupying a state, is accept that imagination is just as real as the 3D. In fact, imagination is reality. We must come to a place of acceptance with this. And to do this, we have to begin to identify with I am, the inner being or the inner self that lives in imagination. I am is that sense of awareness. It is our awareness of being. It is the observer that is constantly observing both the 3D circumstances, but also our inner world. There's that inner sense of being, that nameless, formless, labelless sense of being. That is who we need to start to identify with and identify as, instead of all of the self-concept and all of the conceptions of the outer reality. And at first, this may sound like a bit of a stretch, but if we think about it, we are actually living and identifying with imagination more than we realize. We are living in our imagination a lot more than we give it credit. Think about how many scenarios that we imagine during the day that feel real to us. Truly, let yourself think about it for a moment. If I'm going about my day and I have a fearful thought, and that thought invokes a reaction from me, then that reaction, that feeling, is going to feel pretty real, even if it was just imagination. That feeling feels just as real as if something had happened in the 3D. In that regard, whether it's a thought that invokes this feeling or a 3D circumstance, the feeling is going to feel the same. The feeling will be identical whether it's something that happened from the 3D circumstance or something that happened from my imagination. And just to give an example to help break this down a little bit better, let's say that I'm petting my dog and I notice that there is a lump on her belly that I have not noticed before. Almost immediately, that sense of fear sets in. Thoughts will start to pop off. Oh God, what if it's cancer? Oh no, is it okay? Oh God, I need to go get her a biopsy. Please don't be cancer, please don't be cancer. We might have images and scenes of being in the vet office receiving bad news. We'll feel that tightening in our chest and that sense of sadness, that heart-dropping sensation. All of these thoughts and all of these feelings are creating a reaction within me. It is like a chain reaction setting off within me, all because of that one thought, what if it's cancer? And then my imagination explodes with all of these circumstances and all of these scenarios, none of which are real, but all certainly feel very real. If we are observant, we'll see that all of our reactions, feelings, and thoughts feel just as real to us as if something happened in 3D. If I imagine and have the fearful thought that I'm getting fired from my job, and I could see in my mind my boss telling me that I'm let go, I'm going to notice the same sensations. It's going to invoke the same sort of reactions as if it were happening in 3D. And I can come up with a million examples of this. And you certainly, every single day, react and think the same to imagination as you do to the 3D. So if the feelings and thoughts and reactions feel identical to the feelings and thoughts and reactions we would have at 3D circumstances, then can't we say that they're one and the same? Good or bad, we all have both internal and external experiences, and both can feel incredibly real to us. So when it comes to these teachings, when it comes to imagining the wish fulfilled, when it comes to living in the end, we want to begin to first identify with the internal experience. We want to identify with the I am, or the inner being who is experiencing these things and feeling it as though it was real. We must start to identify more with the internal experiences than just the external ones. And not just for the bad things, but for the good ones and desired ones as well. So I needed to set this up so you had that understanding before I explain states and going into states. Understanding first that it is the internal experience that we're after, and that we must begin to identify with that internal being that's having the experience. I'm going to break down exactly how I imagine and how I get myself moving into different states and living in the end. So when I imagine, my only aim is to become the person I want to be in imagination. My only objective, my only aim, my only goal is to become the person that I desire to be in imagination only. And I cannot emphasize that enough. I am not imagining to try to get an outcome to happen later. I am not imagining to try to make something happen in the 3D. And this is what I mean when I say to not try and manifest, as in make something happen in the future. My only objective and goal is to become and experience the person that I desire to be in my imagination only. It is just to enjoy the experience in imagination, period. When I go within, when I imagine, I do not take any of the conditions of the 3D with me. I do not think about what tomorrow will bring. I do not think about the things that happened yesterday or a week ago. I leave all the 3D circumstances, all the crap from the outside, and keep it out there. I do not take any of those conditions with me into imagination. In my imagination, it is a blank slate. It is a world that is just waiting for construction. That's it. I then experience in imagination exactly what it would be like if I now had the thing that I desired. So for example, if I wanted to, let's say, go to Hawaii, then in my imagination, I am on the beach in Hawaii. I can feel the sand between my toes. I can smell the salt water in the air. I can feel the waves as they come up and splash against my feet. I can hear the humming and chirping of nature around me. But in my imagination, I am already there. I gather as much as I can from my imaginal senses until it begins to actually feel as if I'm in Hawaii. And because I am identifying with the inner self, since I am identifying with the I am, who is living in my imagination, I am having the experience of being there in Hawaii. And since I am in Hawaii, since I am already there in my imagination, I can accept that it is done. So coming out of that imaginal act, I do not question if I did it right or not. I do not think of how am I going to go or when am I going to go, because I already went there. I do not ask myself, is it going to work? Because it already worked. It already happened. Because I am identifying with the self that lives in imagination, because I had the experience with all the senses that I would be experiencing in the 3D, I do not question if it happens because it already happened. So we stop trying to believe that our imaginal acts are going to happen someday. We stop trying to force ourselves to get something. We stop trying to make this a means to an end. Instead, we look at this as if it were the end. This is the cause. And the effects are that the 3D has to follow. We must come to a place of acceptance that our imaginal acts are just as creative as the acts in 3D. That our reactions, responses, and feeling is identical, be it in imagination or in the 3D. So if I can react and respond from an imaginal act the same way I could from a 3D act, then they are just as real. There is no difference between one and the other. The only difference being that in imagination, my world can transcend the 3D limitations of time. I understand that in the 3D, it has to feel and experience like linear time. So there has to be a series of events to get me from where I am physically now to physically in Hawaii. But we can transcend all of that in imagination, and that is the entire point. Neville Goddard always used to say that we live in a world of imagination, and he meant that in every literal sense of the word. Now, if we catch ourselves falling out of that state, if we catch ourselves reverting back to the 3D senses and the 3D real world, that's okay. All we need to do is go back there in imagination. And we continue to return as often as necessary. We don't just want to visit that state once, but then never occupy it again. We don't want to be fixed instead in the 3D world and all the terrible circumstances of our old story. States are eternal in imagination. They do not go away. They do not leave you. You can at any point, at any time, occupy that place in imagination. You can give yourself the experience and you can feel and react to it just as if it were happening in 3D. And we walk in the faith and conviction that because I am, my awareness of being has already had this experience, that the 3D shadow must follow. The 3D always follows imagination, no matter what. Just as a 3-dimensional object casts a 2-dimensional shadow, a 4th-dimensional object is going to cast a 3-dimensional shadow. But it's all the effect of the one cause, and that is your awareness of being. Your imagination is your creative power, and whatever you experience in imagination is an actual creative act that will become flesh, so long as we do not continue to occupy and observe and consume ourselves with more of the same old, same old. Practice becoming more and more aware of your internal world and the experiences that you subject yourself to within it. See how your reactions to 3D and imagination are the same, and things in imagination can feel just as solidly real as they do in this physical world. And because our reactions to imagination and 3D are the same, that means that our imaginal actions and reactions are just as real as the actions and reactions of the 3D. And the more that you come to observe this, the more that you begin to be aware of how much more time you're living in imagination than you may realize. Once you become more aware of the reality of your imagination, the act of moving into a new state will become effortless. And once we begin to identify with the I am, the inner self, the one who lives and dwells in imagination and has the internal experiences, once we begin to truly identify with that and accept that what we imagine is just as real as 3D, once we do this, once we understand this, we can occupy any state of consciousness we desire. And whatever we experience within must become experienced without. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope this made a bit more sense. If you did enjoy this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you are interested in checking out any of my other resources, I will leave links down below to my coaching programs, my workshops and courses, masterclasses, my blog, my podcast, my social channels. Got a ton of resources down in the description box below, so don't forget to check those out. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on this channel. Be sure to check out my Manifestation Fundamentals playlist. Each video is a different topic, but it all talks about how to manifest the best life ever. So until we meet again, you guys, as always, please take care, be well, and never forget that your imagination is the only reality. There you can experience anything you want. Happy manifesting, guys.